And the prophet of the Lord spake unto the master of dungeons, declaring, I cast fireball. Good day, and welcome to Dungeons and Divinity, where we take a look at the Word of God through the lens of the Devil's Game. Now, this week we'll be going through the first arc of the Kings and Prophets campaign, specifically doing a character profile on the pyromancer of Israel. Now, Godless Engineer and KC have already covered this campaign arc on their daily Bible podcast, recently moving into the second arc of the Kings and Prophets campaign. I will go ahead and link the playlist in the description below, so any of those of you who haven't seen it can go and experience it for yourselves. Now, when talking about the pyromancer of Israel, of course, I am referring to the prophet Elijah, who would be a divine soul sorcerer. Of course, one of the main problems with this campaign setting is the pre-made characters don't have actual sheets supplied, and you have to kind of work out for yourself what classes they are and their level and such, because Yahweh is terrible at writing campaign settings. Now, and another issue with these campaign settings is either they were written for one-on-one sessions specifically, or they were run for a party and Yahweh picked a PC to be his favorite and focused specifically on that and wrote the campaign journal / setting book around that character. I very much suspect that it's the second of the two possibilities, because Yahweh shows a lot of signs of being a terrible dungeon master. But that's a topic for another video, so we'll go through with the Elijah, the pyromancer of Israel, and I'll explain why he is, in fact, a high-level divine soul sorcerer with a couple of added feats. Now, the Divine Soul Sorcerer is very special in that it can select spells from both the Sorcerer and the Cleric lists, which is kind of the key to this, to understanding why Elisha is a Divine Soul Sorcerer, because he casts very high levels, both Sorcerer and Cleric spells, such as Plane Shift and Control Weather and Firestorm. And you can't get access to higher level spells if you multi-class between two spellcasters. And it's very obvious that he has high saves, and clerics and sorcerers use different stats for their spellcasting. Sorcerers use charisma, clerics use wisdom. Anyone who's watching this for the Dungeons and Dragons content probably already knows that. But there are probably also some people watching this for the Bible content, so let's get some explanations out of the way. And I will be using 5th edition rules and mechanics to look at this, as always, because that's what I'm personally most familiar with in regards to Dungeons and Dragons. So without further ado, we begin with his first session, where he is camping out by the brook of Chevron, and he gets fed by ravens. Now, this feat can be accomplished with 2 spells, or one of 2 spells. One is Animal Friendship, which basically lets you charm an animal for 24 hours to do what you bid it to, and every time you take a long rest, you can get that spell slot back. And Speak with Animals, which is a ritual, which means you can cast it without using a spell slot, lets you talk to animals and ask favors of them if the dungeon master allows it. Now the problem is neither of these spells are actually on the druid or are actually on the sorcerer or cleric spell list. They are on the druid and ranger spell list, which is a problem because multi-classing. However, the ritual caster feat allows you to pick 2 ritual spells from any spell list and, be able to cast them as a ritual from a ritual book. And so we're going to go ahead and take from the druid spell list with Speak with Animals and Purify Food and Water, which is going to be important a little bit later. Now, after the brook dries up, and he spent a few sessions leveling, just kind of hanging out by the brook, he goes and lives with a widow who he encounters, who had lost, who is down to her last bit of flour and oil. Now, he has already reached level 5 at this point, because he casts Create Food and Water to supply the food for the widow and her son after they make him, unleavened bread or little pancakes, essentially. And this is why we want Purify Food and Water, because in 24 hours that food will expire. It will spoil. But Purify Food and Water undoes that. And the thing is, it provides a lot of food and water because it provides enough for 15 men. So, 3 people, it'll probably keep 3 people going for about 5 days, with subsequent ritual castings of Purify Food and Drink to keep it from going bad. Maybe throw some prestidigitation in to make it taste better, because it is specifically mentioned as bland, and prestidigitation is a sorcerer cantrip that's basically, I do little magic things because I'm a prophet of God. Now, the widow's son grows ill and eventually dies, and a couple minutes later, the prophet brings the widow's son back by casting Revivify on him, which is also a 3rd level cleric spell. Now, I specify Revivify because A, it's fairly low level, and this is in the beginning of the campaign, though he spent a lot of time leveling up, as we'll see at the next major encounter. But it also specifies it has to be done within a short amount of time. And the way it reads is very much, my son just died, what the fuck did you do? And then he goes up, casts Revivify by laying on the boy. Kind of creepy, but we'll continue on. Now, Elijah, pyromancer of Israel, makes his way back to Israel itself and confronts the prophets of Baal challenges them to a essentially a wizard's duel, saying, if you can summon fire for your sacrifice, then Baal is God. But if I can summon fire for mine, then Yahweh is God. Because, of course, the dungeon master named the primary god after himself. Interesting. But, anyways, so they make it to the mountain, and he lets the prophets of Baal go first, and he spends the entire day mocking and subtly counterspelling them to make sure nothing happens. Then it, gets to his turn. He has a trench dug around the altar, but puts so much water on it that it fills up the trench. And then he casts Firestorm, which lets you put 10-foot blocks of fire, or, connecting, and they have to be touching each other, and just make an area of fire, which is basically a giant pillar, showing that Yahweh had answered with fire, and thus the prophets of Baal should be slaughtered. Now, someone could suggest that this means mass suggestion should be included in the spell list. I wouldn't quibble with them. But I find filling it out with fire spells, or spells that can be made into fire through the use of metamagic, is more thematic. And we'll get, for this instance and another that we'll come across. So, after this is done, and while the prophets are being slaughtered, Elijah casts Control Weather and has his servant go up and look for any clouds. And so he keeps nudging the weather more towards torrential downpour, and bringing rain into the area to end the drought that had been going on for years. And once his servant tells him that it's about to start raining, he casts Expeditious Retreat on himself, which is a first level sorcerer spell that basically allows you to dash as a bonus action. So you have your movement speed, you can dash as an action, which doubles your movement speed, and then dashing as a bonus action adds another, makes it triple your movement speed. So he can run 90 feet per 6 seconds under the effects of this spell, allowing him to outrun the king's chariot. Now, he goes off fearing for his life, because the prophets were favored by the queen, he goes off into the desert and casts Goodberry, which is, once again, a druid spell. However, the magic initiate feat lets you cast a first level spell from any spell list. We're taking the druid list again, as well as 2 cantrips. None are really specifically mentioned, but Druidcraft does let you predict the weather, and it is, very hermit related, and he's got a reputation for being a crazy hermit out in the wilderness. Sounds like someone in the New Testament campaign, but that's beside the point. And Produce Flame allows you to summon a little mote of fire into your hand, which doesn't burn you, and stays there until you use it to attack something, which is thematic for Mr. Fireball. So he eats the Goodberry, goes to sleep, casts it again, and and continues off into the desert, where he finds, shelter in a cave, has, divine experiences, not really affecting the wider world, so can't really probably say maybe divination, where, you can ask a deity a question and the dungeon master has to answer truthfully, or maybe contact other plane, one of those perhaps. And then, the soldiers of King Ahaziah come to take him to the king after he tells a captain that the king is going to die of his illness. And then we go to where he casts Fireball, which can get a group of 64 people maximum in its area of effect, assuming we're abiding by 1 person per 5 foot square rules. And the king sends another 51 men, and he does it again. The king, and he basically solves 2 encounters with I cast Fireball, which is the murder hobo caster's tagline before going back to, see the king. And, the campaign, this arc of the campaign very much ends with him and his apprentice, Elisha, going off. He parts, he casts control water to part the Jordan and says, if you watch me, if you can see me leave, get taken up into heaven, then you can get a double portion of my spirit, which is odd, seeing as how he's currently a 14th, 15th, he's nearing max level at this point. He was nearing max level during the whole encounter with the prophets of Baal, because control weather is an 8th level spell. And he does, and then he ascends. Now, the Divine Soul Sorcerer has a feature they get at 14th level, which essentially lets them turn into an angel and fly, but this was obviously reflavored into a chariot of fire. And once he reaches a high enough altitude, he casts plane shift and goes off to heaven. And that's the end of that arc, essentially. Now, so you can see you can see how murder hobory is encouraged in these campaigns, but I'll just encourage you to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, and remember, indoctrination is a hell of a drug.